The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to give just a few more minutes before we get started to allow everyone to join. We had about 300 or so folks sign up for the webinar, and we're only about 80 or 90 right now, so we're going to give just a few more moments. Hello again, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to kick it over to Nathan Batchelder so he can provide some opening comments before we start the remainder. Nathan?
Thank you so much, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Batchelder. I'm the Director of External Affairs in the Division of Professions and Occupations here at DORA. And first, I want to welcome everyone to our webinar, which will present a proposal for a better governance and regulatory structure for the 6 types of mental health professions currently regulated in Colorado. Today, we'll have a presentation from Ronnie Hines, our Division Director, and Jackie Arcelin, Deputy Director of Centralized Services. Following the presentation, we will provide 3 key questions for you to consider as you evaluate the information in today's presentation. However, I do want to say that due to the large number of attendees and the technical considerations of today's webinar, we want to ensure we get feedback from all stakeholders. And to that end, we will actually be asking for your input and feedback on our proposal via a survey that we will email out to the attendees and everyone else registered for this webinar very shortly. And that will be in lieu of comments or questions at the end of today's presentation. So again, I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. I'll now pass the microphone to our Division Director to begin the presentation, Ronnie Hines.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Ronnie Hines, Division Director.
Thank you, Jackie. So thank you for all of you that are able to attend the webinar today. We're offering this webinar as we continue to develop a proposal to streamline the regulatory structure for mental health professionals. And your insights, your ideas, and your engagement are much appreciated and are vital to the development of a new approach that will address problems that we have identified. I encourage you to complete the survey Nathan mentioned, and I'll have more information at the end of the webinar in that regard. But let's take a look at the big picture of the Department of Regulatory Agencies. It's a state department within the executive branch. And at the end of 2019, as a department, we held a stakeholder forum and continued the discussion that was started in late 2018 with the work of the Mental Health Task Force. We presented some of the challenges that licensees, consumers, and the boards themselves face as they interact and conduct formal business under the current board structure with 6 independent boards. The discussion and additional feedback shaped today's event, and we want to provide more detailed information about the current structure and processes, as well as some key data that show how the 6 mental health boards compare to other boards in the division. As we'll discuss during the webinar, the data shows that there is a problem, and we want to be proactive and we want to be responsible and not ignore it, because it's putting mental health professionals and consumers in Colorado at a disadvantage. Delays and inefficiencies necessarily need to be addressed so that we can better serve the providers and patients who make up this important segment of the healthcare system. Addressing these concerns will also best align the regulation of mental health professionals with other healthcare providers and ensure that each mental health professional is able to work to the top of his or her scope and best serve the consumers of Colorado and ensure adequate resources are available to consumers. And in the Division of Professions and Occupations, we are responsible for licensure and enforcement of 54 different professions, occupations, and businesses, including the 6 mental health boards. The boards and the programs in the division share a common set of goals and are focused on consumer protection. Colorado has been recognized for its focus on streamlined processes, and in particular, DPO has been recognized nationally as a high-functioning regulatory department for practitioners and for consumers. Unfortunately, the current mental health board structure is truly an outlier when compared to others in the division. As we continue our efforts to bring consistency and effective management practices to all programs, we want to address these issues and bring the mental health boards, licensees, and consumers into a system where they receive the service they deserve. Although the division handles all the administrative functions, including daily operations, board member training, administration, and processing of licenses that meet the requirements put forth in law, as well as the initial processing of complaints consistent with legal provisions, the division also handles budgets, investigations, and enabled the 6 mental health boards, which includes 42 different members overall, to do the daily work of the boards. The boards are the decision makers for licensing applications that may report past criminal history or maybe educational reviews outside the norm. But they are also tasked with reviewing every complaint and determining whether a practitioner acted outside or below the generally accepted standard of practice, or otherwise violated the law as set forth in the Mental Health Practice Act. In addition, the boards are tasked with making rules and policies to administer and clarify expectations for practitioners. And as an administrator of these programs, the division staff does work diligently to ensure consistency and consumer protection among the 6 boards. They do this as they administer the rules and the law, and they work to make sure that disciplinary outcomes for those who hold multiple licenses, that they receive the same disciplinary outcome. But the boards are independent, and that may not always be a possibility. But division staff has facilitated joint sessions among the boards to meet this consistency goal and to best serve the licensees and consumers of Colorado. So this slide focuses on how DPO not only fits under DORA's overall structure, which houses a total of 10 different divisions ranging from real estate to financial services, insurance, and banking. In a similar model, the division has an umbrella over the boards and the programs that are housed in it. And so under that umbrella, not only are the boards housed there, but so are many centralized services that serve and impact all the programs. As you can see here, we have many centralized functions that do allow for efficient processing in most regards, including for licensing, exams, investigations, inspections, operations, and other duties. So when we talk about the mental health boards, we're really talking about just one piece of the larger umbrella regulatory structure that serves all licensees and consumers in Colorado. So let's give you some general information on DPO's boards, and I think to do a little bit of level setting to make sure that we all have the same understanding of how boards operate. So as a quick refresher, this slide provides some basic facts. The division actually houses 23 different boards. Almost all members of these 23 boards, commissions, and committees are appointed by the governor. Board appointees include both licensed professionals as well as public members who serve on each board. And as noted earlier, but worth highlighting again, the boards have many independent duties under their various practice acts. They consider complaints and issue discipline when appropriate based on the law and the standards of practice. Boards review applications from applicants who answer yes to certain screening questions and ratify those applications approved by the Office of Licensing. But for the applications that are reviewed by the boards, typically the boards will see things like acting below a standard of practice in another state. They might see previous adverse effects of actions in other states. They might see workplace issues, potentially drug or alcohol or previous criminal convictions or similar circumstances. The boards adopt rules and policies as well, and that further clarifies their statutory charge made in the Mental Health Practice Act. And this slide talks about the general board oversight for all DPO professions. The boards do make decisions under the law, and typically this includes ensuring and being charged to make sure that applicants and licensees have a minimum competency to enter, but also to continue practice when they renew. The boards also hold licensees accountable for unprofessional conduct through enforcement of the Mental Health Practice Act or their applicable professional act. The Mental Health Practice Act, as many of you I'm sure know, has some common provisions and some of those include the definition of psychotherapy and provisions that may violate the law, which equally apply to the 6 different boards. And then the Practice Act is also comprised of the 6 independent parts for each mental health profession, which identify board composition and profession-specific details. The more efficient and streamlined approach that we can take to the administration of these processes, including collaborative rulemaking, concise and streamlined decisions regarding licensing and discipline, then mental health professionals will also likely see lower costs and fees as they renew, and consumers will see improved access to quality and safe mental health services. As a simple example, if a mental health professional holds 2 or more licenses under the current model with 6 independent decision-making boards, the professional may experience significant cost if a complaint is received and the board or boards determine discipline is warranted under the law and the matter goes to hearing. With hearings, if multiple licenses are involved, the board or boards will have 2 separate attorneys, as each board is represented by a separate attorney, and may result in different disciplines. So if the core board functions were housed under one board for all mental health professionals, the licensee would experience reduced costs. For example, there would be a single board attorney present and preparing for meetings or otherwise being involved in disciplinary proceedings would be limited, and the costs of administering the program would be immediately impacted and likely lower fees. So here we are with the current state, the 6 separate boards, 7 members on each, both professional and public, and 42 individual board members. Each board has its own legal counsel, makes its own rules, has personnel assigned to the board, conducts its individual outreach, assesses education requirements, oversees the scope of practice, the standard of care, and does that within differing meeting schedules. But again, boards do have overlapping requirements already under the Mental Health Practice Act, as the general provisions define psychotherapy, define violations of the Act, define the powers and duties charged to the boards, and, for example, defines mandatory disclosure requirements in the same way. So how does this tie all together? The licensing unit housed within DPO is a centralized office, and it issues the majority of licenses without board review if the applicant meets established requirements and rule. It's a centralized process for all boards and programs housed in the division. So for many of you who may be on this webinar, your process of applying and receiving your license may have been smooth and efficient, but for those who needed board review, it could be a very different story. As we noted, the board reviews any application where questions may have arisen over potential issues with qualifications, or if an applicant seeking licensure has discipline on a license in another state or has a criminal history. The board's purview also extends to the complaint process. So as you can see here, there are total numbers of applications for the past few years for all applications for all professions housed in DPO. And then the next line has the total original mental health applications approved, which is a significant number of those overall received in DPO. But then the final line shows those applications that are sent for board review, which is a fairly small number if you consider the number of board meetings throughout the year. But the board considers each of these applications that may need additional review as they seek to protect consumers and ensure quality services. The board oversees this charge in individual board meetings where board meetings are noticed, and which means information is available to anyone on the webinar if they are interested in attending the board meeting and seeing the process in person. But for clarity, let's review how a board might spend its time. Although the centralized Office of Licensing is able to review and approve a significant number of applications, the board specifically review applications for those applicants who answer yes to a screening question on the application. Here, you do see that the numbers are only around 300 applications a year. Keep in mind, the boards have different schedules. Some meet every other month, while some meet quarterly. And we also have to consider that boards are required to have a quorum, which means there has to be enough board members present to conduct board business. And if there isn't a quorum, a meeting might be canceled and push an application review forward another 2 to 3 months, impacting application timelines for renewals as well, if there's an issue that needs to be considered by the board, and even for applications of those professionals looking to work in Colorado that may have been licensed in another state. So we wanted to give you just a general visualization of what processing an application looked like. So this is really for what it could look like for any type of application, and how an applicant moves through the process. For example, if an application comes in and an applicant answered yes to a screening question and perhaps indicated a previous substance abuse problem, the board may seek additional information, may choose to have the applicant undergo a mental status evaluation before issuing a license, and this all extends the timeline for the application to be reviewed and potentially approved. All of these steps take extra time and may be compounded by whether the board has a quorum. Meanwhile, the applicant cannot practice and may be a potentially valuable and qualified mental health professional, and delays the ability not only to work, but to offer services in the state of Colorado. Similarly, we wanted to give you a snapshot of the complaint process and how it works. As a complaint comes in, the staff issues a letter to gather a response by the licensee, which could have many results. It could go to the Office of Investigations to subpoena records. It could go for board review, and the board decides more information is needed and goes to the Office of Investigations to gather additional information, and then goes back to board review. And that could result in a dismissal. It could result in a confidential letter of concern. It could result in being referred to the Attorney General's office for discipline, or other orders could be issued. So that's just a snapshot of how a complaint is processed. But I think in seeing the different possibilities, and you can easily see how the timeline might be extended and also impacted by the board meeting schedule. And again, in the case of a licensee that holds multiple mental health licenses, that the delay could be more significant as the boards both consider the same information and try to get to the outcome at a similar time. Streamlining complaint processes in the mental health boards may provide an opportunity not only to improve timelines, to ensure consistent outcomes, but also an opportunity to lower fees depending on many factors, including a reduction in legal service costs. So how it works in practice, as we briefly explained, a complaint is received related to a licensee. The complaint can be filed by anyone, by a patient, by a family member, a friend, or even another mental health professional. It goes to the board, but first the staff requests information from the complainant, the licensee, or others as needed. And all of that information will go before the board to decide whether disciplinary action is appropriate. Each timeline is determined by board meeting schedule. Each outcome of a complaint will be determined by the individual board, including whether an investigation is needed, additional information is needed, or what, if any, discipline is appropriate. As you can see, oversight by 6 separate boards significantly impacts not only those mental health professionals that hold multiple licenses, but any mental health professional and consumer engaged in the complaint process and who deserve and want a streamlined, succinct resolution to the complaint. So in identifying issues and recommending changes, and after giving this overview of the mental health boards and the processes for applications and complaints, I'd like to switch gears and discuss the early conversations that we've had to explore some of the challenges faced by the mental health boards and also by licensees and consumers. So in the fall of 2018, the division convened a mental health task force to start identifying key issues of importance to licensees and the public. This forum provided an opportunity to bring diverse perspectives to the table to discuss really challenging topics and issues impacting mental health professionals and consumers alike. Representatives from every mental health profession were invited to the discussions, and many others were observing, but it was comprised of 13 members representing providers selected by professional associations, consumer organizations, educators, the defense bar, and public agencies. The task force had specific assignments, and the members came together to represent themselves as individuals, as well as the broader mental health profession. The main focus was initially on reviewing existing rules, potentially recommending rule changes, and identification of issues for consideration by the division as we approached the sunset review. The division had already identified areas of duplication, redundant and delayed processes, discrepancies, and inconsistencies, but really wanted to seek a fresh look and insights from those most directly affected. The discussions of the group evolved into recognition of the duplicative work of the boards, as noted earlier, including review of applications and complaints, but also identifying, for example, the issue of how duplicative rules had the potential to have conflict. Additionally, with new legislation, each board is required to undergo separate rulemaking to implement new law, adding to the duplication and redundancy of the board efforts. So some highlights of the issues resulting from the current structure. We have identified and explored a problem that we need to address reasonably, sensibly, and responsibly, as well as to align the oversight with Colorado's dedication to ensuring streamlined best practices and to deliver quality services across the state of Colorado. It is a problem that centers on duplication and inefficient processes, and it includes license holders with multiple mental health credentials experiencing delays or even varying outcomes and costs when more than one board must review their case. Delays can also occur if a board doesn't have a quorum, meaning there are not enough members to hold proceedings, and even rescheduling or canceling can add to the processing times. Each of the 6 mental health boards has separate rules, despite a single practice act, often creating not only duplication, but potentially conflicts for those who hold multiple licenses. So some other considerations and areas that will inform any development of a revamped regulatory structure, whether it's clarity in addressing scope of practice issues in a collaborative and cohesive model, addressing complaints in a consistent manner for multi-licensed professionals in a thoughtful and time and cost-efficient manner with consistent outcomes, or ensuring adequate and qualified supervisors are available to meet the needs of applicants working on their clinical supervised hours, or simply ensuring the most effective and proven approach to regulation in Colorado to best meet the needs for mental health services across the state, and which is a vital component of the healthcare delivery system. We're committed to continuous process and regulatory improvement, and we'll seek your feedback as you consider these issues today. As we consider solutions, legislative action would be needed if there was a change in structure to ensure streamlined delivery of services, addressing some of the issues we've discussed today, as well as some of these other considerations on this slide. As discussed in the last forum, there are proven models in Colorado, like the Colorado Medical Board, that may offer a model to consider. So in looking at the medical board, the structure provides a model example of achieving efficiencies, consistency, and streamlined goals discussed earlier in the presentation, while being mindful of representation of disciplines on panels. The medical board's integrated panel system keeps applications and complaints moving, while full board meetings focus on rulemaking and policy decisions. You can see here the panel system, which is divvied up among licensing, and then the 2 panels for case review, as well as the full board for policy decisions, provides an integrated decision-making system that keeps applications and other work moving forward without delay. The panels utilize experts when needed to address specific complaint matters, ensuring appropriate assessment of complex standard of practice questions while ensuring consumer protection. And most importantly, the Colorado Medical Board includes oversight of multiple professionals, including physicians, physician assistants, dermatologists, neurologists, and other specialties. It's a panel system allowing for efficient and effective processing of applications and complaints across multiple specialties while ensuring consumer protection. In addition, its members recognize when additional expertise is needed and has the resources available to make those decisions. The efficiencies behind the system are demonstrated in the data and the numbers behind processing applications and handling complaints. To illustrate these efficiencies, we'll move on to the next slides, which will show more of the numbers and data behind the structure. So here you can see the comparison among the medical board and the current 6 separate mental health boards. The data shown here are the averages, but include applications which division staff were able to process without board review. Obviously, each application varies in complexity and the qualifications, we understand that, as well as those applications that required board review. So if someone answered yes on the application and in a screening question, such as prior criminal history. When looking at the medical board example, we see the average time it takes to process an application is only about 21 days. This is significantly lower than the average number of days it takes for a mental health application to be processed, which is about 38 days, when considering applicants to all the separate boards. The average number of days does vary by mental health board, but from the chart you can see that all mental health boards have longer application processing times than the medical board, except for registered psychotherapists who have significantly different registration requirements. This means that an applicant for licensure generally has to wait longer to start practicing in their profession compared to the medical profession. This not only delays their being able to begin earning an income through practicing, but also delays the availability of new mental health professionals to be available to consumers and meet the needs across the state. Let's also look at the applications that just required board review. So, for example, those who answered yes to a screening question or perhaps had education or experience that required board approval. Again, when we look at mental health boards compared to the medical board, as shown in this chart, we found these applications are processed about in 41 days for the medical board, but across all the mental health boards, average processing time is almost 61 days. As you can see, every mental health board took longer than the medical board to complete application reviews when board review was required. Again, this means an applicant for licensure has to wait longer to start practicing, and services are less available across the state in comparison to the medical profession. Let's look at the average complaint processing times as well, continuing with our comparison. Overall, it's taking the mental health boards an average of almost 261 days to close a complaint, where it takes the medical board only about 126 days. Every mental health board takes longer than the medical board, except for the Marriage and Family Therapy Board, whose complaints are lower in number, as are the number of licensees in Colorado, compared to the other mental health boards. The slower complaint case processing time for mental health has several ramifications. I do want to clarify that the average complaint time includes from the time the complaint comes in to when it's closed. That could include a dismissal or going to hearing at the Office of Administrative Court. So it's everything in the life of a case. But the ramifications are significant. If a licensee continues to practice during the extended processing time, consumers could be at risk of harm if the licensee's actions continue and are ultimately found to be improper by the board or otherwise in violation of state law. If a board suspends a license while it investigates, even if the complaint is ultimately dismissed, the licensee cannot practice until the case is closed. Consumers may suffer extreme angst awaiting resolution until the final action. The licensee may experience significant costs during this time, as will the board for its legal expenses. The overall mental health regulated professional may experience impacts to licensing fees as costs rise, particularly when a licensee holds multiple licenses, both the licensee and the board experience significant costs and impacts your licensing fees. So, a new direction for Colorado. As a result of these issues, the task force not only discussed the possibility of consolidating and streamlining the 6 boards to be more efficient and effective for licensees and consumers, but also resulted in the forum in December of 2019. The idea of streamlined regulation has been explored in depth, and I think many of you probably attended that December meeting where we continued the discussion. And today, we are focused on how a consolidated board of some sort or shape can improve efficiency, effectiveness, reduce costs, improve consumer protection, and positively impact outcomes for licensees and consumers in Colorado. So some of you may have seen this slide in the December forum, but taking into consideration all of the information we've provided today and in that forum, we want to offer some potential options to change the structure of the mental health boards to achieve a more efficient, effective regulatory model that not only streamlines decisions, but provides a better level of protection to consumers and aligns with best practices in Colorado. You can see here there are 2 potential options: a panel system that is similar to the medical board or even models similar to the nursing and dental boards, which consist of disciplinary panels and a licensing panel, or a condensed panel system that includes 2 separate panels handling both licensing and discipline. It's important to note that each option would include 1 board with members from each discipline and members of the public to ensure equitable representation and perspectives, as well as expertise. As a side note, please keep in mind the current structure of the mental health boards requires 42 board members across 6 separate mental health boards. The Colorado Medical Board conducts their business efficiently with only 17 members, with a similar number of active licenses and complaints. And finally, while these are proposals at this point, it's important to note that ultimately these changes would need to be made through legislation, which would require the legislators in Colorado to enact a bill through the legislative process and would result in a fundamental change to the current Mental Health Practice Act, if approved. So in conclusion, we want to give you some questions to consider. We want to take the time to offer several questions for consideration to those who attended our webinar today. The questions are meant to keep the conversation moving along, to engage you, our stakeholders, on your thoughts, your options, and suggestions on the information in the presentation and from the previous forum. The questions will also be sent to mental health professionals licensed under the 6 mental health boards, along with the webinar, so that they're able to provide their feedback as well. The first question: what are your thoughts on the consolidated structure similar to the medical board? Will it achieve the increased efficiency and consumer protection we're seeking? Of the 2 proposed structure, panel versus condensed panel system, which makes the most sense for you? Or do you have a modification that will meet the needs of Colorado? And finally, what could better improve the proposed consolidated structure that would achieve a positive impact for applicants, licensees, and consumers, and that will address the issues to ensure quality services across the state? But I would also add that we have sufficient numbers of mental health professionals to offer those quality services. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We do appreciate the time you took during your day to join us. As mentioned, you and all stakeholders should expect to receive an email later today with the slides from today's webinar or a link to the webinar on the website, as well as a survey with the questions we just reviewed. We do value your input and ideas, and please be sure to respond to the survey by the end of business on Monday, January 13th. This will ensure all attendees, as well as licensees, have the opportunity to provide feedback and share their thoughts. And we do plan on continuing the discussion on how best to improve our regulatory programs that impact professionals and consumers alike. So more information and communications will be sent in the near future regarding any future developments, and so that we continue to provide opportunities to engage in this important discussion. So thank you once again, And this will conclude our webinar. Thank you again for providing all of your feedback. We decided to take this approach just to make sure that everyone, given the high volume of people on the webinar today, have the opportunity to be heard. So again, please be sure to respond to the survey and provide your feedback in writing. Thank you again.